Today, I will be talking about the critical period. For my topic is called the critical period. The specific purpose is to inform my audience about the critical period and its importance. Today, I will discuss the critical period and why it's important. Language acquisition during the critical period and emotional regulation during the critical period as well. Introduction. Every person in this room has gone through the critical period. According to Charlotte Nickerson's article published in 2021 on Simply Psychology, she explains that the critical period is a determined stage of development where an organism is best ready to acquire a pattern of behavior skills. This stage of development is labeled as critical because this does not reoccur later in life. If the organism does not receive proper exposure to whatever discernible stimulus may be, it is difficult or even impossible for the organism to develop this skill later on. A couple years ago, I noticed that children are particularly better than adults when it comes to learning new and multiple languages. This sparked my original interest with the critical period. First, I have spent a lot of time researching this topic from articles to YouTube videos. Secondly, I have taken a psychology class that briefly went over this topic, so I am knowledgeable in this area. My goal is, after this speech is that you will have an understanding of how stimulus during the critical period is vital for many stages of brain development during childhood. When we think of critical period, many people assume that there's a hard cutoff. Instead, it's more like this graph where there's gradual decline from the optimal period. As you can see, there are many critical periods that happen. However, today I want to focus mainly on language acquisition during the critical period, then go over emotional regulation as well. Now that we have gone over the general facts, I am going to discuss language acquisition during the critical period. In order to speak a language on the same level as a native speaker, you must learn that language during your childhood. In Amy Feen's 2013 peer-reviewed journal published on Berkeley's open access publications, she argues that learning a language during the critical period actually creates a neural connections in the brain. When you are young, your brain is plastic, meaning it is able to create new neural pathways rapidly. However, when you are older, these pathways becomes fixed. This can greatly contribute to why children are superior in learning language as opposed to adults. Along with this, children are not afraid to make mistakes. They're confident in attempting to speak different languages out loud, even if they're not always correct. This allows room for learning. Take Jeannie Wiley's case, for example. She was a neglected child who was tied up to a potty chair. Jeannie Wiley received a menial human interaction growing up, having little exposure to even a first language. Jeannie was eventually discovered by a social worker when she was 13 and taken to a rehabilitation center where a team of psychologists and language experts studied her. During this, they discovered her language abilities were similar to a 1-year-old. Eventually, she began to progress quickly in certain areas such as learning to use the toilet and dress herself. While, however, her language remained poor. While she was able to learn some words, she could not put these words together in a meaningful way. Unfortunately, things did not get better as she regressed from speaking. Now that I have gone over language acquisition, I will move on to the next topic of emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is the ability to monitor your emotions. During early childhood, babies are building their foundation of emotional development, which will be the support of their mental health all the way until adulthood. Pamela Lee, founder and editor-in-chief of Parenting of Brain, explains in her 2022 article that learning to self-regulate emotions can significantly impact a child's relationships, academic performance, mental health, and overall well-being. In studies conducted at a Romanian orphanage, only orphans who were adopted by foster families prior to the age of 2 were able to acquire emotional regulation skills, up to the level of children who were never brought to an orphanage. However, the children who remained there were deprived of proper social contact and parental care. Unfortunately, it was clear these children suffered from social and emotional regulation skills. This can explain why a lot of the underlying trauma people may many people have actually stemmed for the child from childhood. And at this point, it is clear that these are your most impressionable years. Babies are actually learning the concept of trust. In order for a parent to establish trust with their child, it is important that they attend to their cries. When a kid cries, they are not trying to manipulate. They actually need their parental figure, and crying is their way of communicating that. Overall, emotional regulation is more important than we realized and is ultimately what sets us apart from other animals. This is what our this is what makes our brains so complex. So it is quite clear that the critical period is vital in our development as humans. Now that I have taught you about language acquisition and emotional regulation during the critical period, it's time for me to wrap this speech up. Like I said before, proper stimulus during the critical period is vital for many stages of brain development during childhood. First, I went over language acquisition, then I went over emotional regulation, both of which happen during the critical period. However, I do want to end my speech by saying, although the critical period is very important, it does not define us, and no one is labeled as a failure if they do not meet certain milestones during this era. Although all of us are part this time in our life, we can use this information to better learn about ourselves. Thank you.